Friday Refresh brought to you by Collisions Auto Repair Services in Killen, Alabama. You can contact them at 256-272-2007. How does one measure influence? There are standards for weight, volume, height. There are even ways that people attempt to measure success. But influence is pretty hard to determine because influence is an open-ended concept. Influence cannot be turned off. Influence cannot be contained. It cannot be measured simply because it's still growing even as you attempt to put it on the scales. In fact, Stephen King once said, "We never know which lives we influence or when or why." You cannot measure that for which you don't have the full product. See, only heaven knows. On January 22nd, 2024, I said goodbye to my dad. By earthly standards, he was middle of the road. He wasn't wealthy. He had been poor as a kid and probably a young man, but he worked his way out of it. He was a welder and an electrician. He didn't weld or wire any famous landmarks. He loved to sing, but he never performed in front of a concert crowd. I think he only left the country maybe once to see my brother. He never wrote a book. He never made a movie or a TikTok or even a Ben and Travis video. He was never on the news for some significant discovery or groundbreaking theory. He rarely, if ever, preached. But on the day of his funeral, hundreds of people poured through the line. Most knew him. Some knew his kids or his grandkids or his wife. At last count, members of over 40 different churches came through the line to greet the family at the funeral. The ones who knew him talked about what a good, kind, and caring person he was. The ones who helped with the funeral talked about how he was instrumental in getting them to do ministry, how he influenced them in their faith. My brothers and I remember a little bit harder version of my dad, of course. As we grew up, he was a tough disciplinarian who wanted things done the right way. And while it was frustrating as a kid, I've grown to be appreciative of that foundation as an adult. By the end of his life, his mind would often be confused with Lewy body's dementia. But even still, the caretaker spoke of how sweet he was. The last week confirmed what I knew. He was appreciated by friends, respected by coworkers and church family, admired by his kids, loved by his grandkids, and adored by his wife. His influence as a friend, a coworker, a parent, a grandparent, spouse, and a spiritual leader will continue even though he's gone. But I tell you this because my dad was not unique. He just chose to impact positively the people in his circle, and in doing so, his influence is impossible to measure. The same can be true of you. Dad always encouraged us to leave a place better than we found it. So maybe that's the key. You too can leave your school, your workplace, your association, your church, your ball team, or your home better than you found it. Dad wasn't a national celebrity that will be seen on documentaries. He didn't have a global impact that people will read about in history books. But he left his corner of the world a better place than he found it. I hope that someday the same can be said for you and me. And that is your Friday Refresh.